3 years. 3 years ago today, I made a decision that would radically alter the course of my life. I became a fan of the Willy Wonka franchise, and ever since then, it has been this massive roller coaster. In late 2021, I wanted to make this big return to YouTube, since at the time my channel was dead and consisted of outdated meme edits. This was during a time where iceberg chart videos were still somewhat popular, so I decided to make my own. What my iceberg was about changed multiple times, but it finally landed on Willy Wonka. I have no idea what drove me to choose Willy Wonka. It was so long ago to the point where I can't remember. But in late 2021 and especially early 2022, I decided to make my Willy Wonka iceberg. And I uploaded the video in August of that year, and the rest is complicated. Afterwards, and even while researching the iceberg itself, I came across pieces of media that completely restructured what I had thought and known about the franchise. Like how there was an entire Swedish cartoon movie that had flown under public radar until I had talked about it. Or how Nestle's Wonka brand had operated on completely different principles in the UK compared to the brand's presence in the rest of the world. Throughout this time, I had adopted a video style that persists to this day. A video style which, yes, does somewhat rely on images, is mostly dialogue. I did this largely because the old HP laptop I was using wouldn't accept anything else, because anything higher than that meant that making videos on it would have taken 3 times as long. Back then, I had made some of my most popular Wonka videos, like my first video talking about the Swedish cartoon and an outdated tier list. By the start of 2023, I had gotten a new gaming laptop, which not only meant I could increase the quality of my videos, but it also meant I could get them out in a more timely manner. I remember back during the days of my old HP laptop, that thing was so bad it took multiple hours just to render a simple 10 to 20 minute video. Now with my HP laptop, much larger videos could be completed in less than an hour. Throughout the videos, there were certain things that persisted, like the special thanks that cite important sources, the usage of simple backgrounds, and even certain jokes. And the most prime joke was my hatred towards 2005 Wonka. There's the Disastrophe 2005 film. Oh yay! I gotta add the 2005 film to the bunch too. That's not good.
The 2005 film is a better adaptation per se, but oh gosh, that film sucks as a whole.
This joke started way back, all the way back during my second ever Willy Wonka video, and from there it continued to snowball more and more, gaslighting myself into believing that 2005 Wonka had doomed the franchise into eternal mediocrity, which is not true. My 2005 Wonka hatred was spawned largely due to the false belief that 2005 Wonka made the Wonka Company suck, when in all reality it was Nestle's fault, and if anything the suck started to happen in the 2010s when Wonka went through their corporate minimalism stage. I also blame the 2005 film for being the reason as to why the Swedish cartoon became lost media, which is also really dumb. The Swedish cartoon being lost has to do with it being trapped in its own bubble for its whole life, not because some other movie stole all of its non-existent thunder. Unfortunately, stupid idiot me didn't realize this, and he kept going and going with this stupid belief. Going on entire tangents talking about how the Swedish cartoon was better based solely off of the fact that it followed the book more closely. Which is so stupid. During the midst of this, I had started what I call the Wonka War series, where I compare the films with the original book. There were also miscellaneous projects, like me redoing my Nestle UK Wonka video, and me starting my The X Willy Wonka Designs videos. During these videos, I had teased the Wonka Wars episode where I had compared the book and the 2005 film. And I made a lot of hype for this thing too. I had made reference to it in at least 2 of my videos. It was going to rival my iceberg video in both length and content. I even made a community post about it on the night it aired. And lo and behold, it was uploaded in late 2023, right before the school year started. All that video did was end up making me look like a massive fool who was being a salty man-child. Backed up by an 80% like to dislike ratio, which in retrospect is a little generous, especially for a 2-hour video that took multiple months to make. And not once did I ever think, you know, Joseph, maybe you're taking this thing a little too far. All of the issues I have with my 2005 Wonka review could make for an entire video by itself, but it largely boils down to me making a bunch of petty arguments and complaining about even the smallest details. And you know what? I'm glad that everyone decided to voice their opinions. Thank you guys for getting me to realize just how much of a blockhead I was being. I have a much more positive opinion of the 2005 film now, and even of 2005 Wonka himself. After this, I had to go on hiatus for several months due to the college semester at the time. During this time, the research I had done in previous videos had started to gain traction. The information about the Swedish cartoon that had appeared in previous videos of mine had started to make its rounds on social media. Multiple posts about it were made on, for example, multiple subreddits. This had all culminated on December the 3rd, 2023. Literally on the 2-year anniversary of me becoming a Willy Wonka fan, when Tele Animated had made a Willy Wonka evolution video, and right away in the thumbnail we see Swedish Wonka and Nestle UK Wonka. Two Wonkas that were basically my bread and butter. Tele Animated had used my own research in this video, and he used nearly every single version of Wonka that I talked about. Even that one nondescript clay version of the Nestle mascot that I highlighted in my Wonka tier list for some odd reason. Even looking at it now, several months later, it feels like a fever dream. Having these hyper-obscure Wonkas from a hyper-obscure nobody be highlighted by such an awesome and big channel. And in response, I made a video saying thank you to Tele Animated, as well as dunking on my 2005 Wonka review, as well as going into my plans for the future. And just a couple months later, I came up with a new style of content, doing gaming stuff. The first of these was doing Teletubbies 3, a first-person horror game without using the flashlight. And with this video, I bounced back in a way I never could have expected. That specific video now sits at over 100,000 views. For reference, that video got about 1,000 or 2,000 views in, I think, a little over a week. A couple of my Willy Wonka videos from before that time still haven't passed the 2K view mark. And the last time a video of mine got this many views was with those stupid old meme videos from like 2019 and 2020. But on that note, let's take a step back for a minute. Willy Wonka, what even is this franchise? How did it come to be? And how did we get here to where we are now? Well, buckle up because it's quite the wild ride. And like all rides, we need to start from the beginning. The original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory novel was released in 1964, and to this day, I think it is one of the best versions of the tale. And it has been able to hold up surprisingly well. I love the original book for many different reasons, and the way that Book Wonka is handled here is one of the biggest reasons. Book Wonka works as a children's book protagonist. He's meant to be this big adult guiding these child characters and teaching them the morals and themes that the book sets out to teach. And in children's books, you need to make sure that the adult is a well-mannered character. Child's parents are adults, and they need to be good role models, and Roald Dahl knew this, so he wrote Book Wonka in a way so that he wasn't too harsh on the kids. But he wasn't too soft either. He, believe it or not, actually cared about these children. Any sort of sarcastic remarks or prankster moments were him trying to lighten the mood and him being his energetic self. He would freak out as much as the parents did whenever the kids got into a doozy. However, he never tried to actively help the kids, only because what they got themselves into was through their own volition, and actually trying to alleviate their screw-ups would largely nullify the morals of the book. That bad behavior has consequences, and you need to learn from them. And having Wonka actually care about these children not only works from a moral standpoint, it also makes him a genuinely fun character to experience. Him having this sense of care adds on to his character, and it can really open up a lot of theorizing and interpretations. But enough talk about Wonka. What else makes this book great? Well, aside from the morals, there are a lot of really cool ideas and pretty neat bits of wordplay. It helps kids get their creative juices flowing. And if you take it as a piece of literature by itself, it runs off of beautifully crafted characters, an engaging story, and superbly expressed settings that you can only rarely see in other original works. The original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is not the only book in this franchise. Surprisingly, a lot of them have a ton to offer, like the book sequel. Yes, it has a sequel and it's, something. I made an entire video discussing it, so I won't be going into huge detail, but the sequel is crazy even by Willy Wonka standards. Dare I say it alienates it from the original. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. After all, it's in the nature of Willy Wonka to be unpredictable and filled with adventure. But at least with the original it followed some sort of theme. It revolved around candy and sweets. The sequel barely follows any sort of pattern. First you're in space, and next you're in the limbo for unborn souls.
Incarnation, apparently, before you're born, your spirit is in limbo. And it just so happens that Willy Wonka has a magical glass elevator that is easily able to access this limbo, and he can access it under his factory. What in the forever frickin' frack?
What's the theme here? Overall, the sequel is good, and maybe this is just blatant favoritism talking, but I don't know, something about the random nature of the sequel makes it feel very alienated from the original, to the point where it feels more like a spin-off rather than a continuation. There are also other books that don't necessarily follow a story and instead focus on a gimmick, like with the coloring book released in 2016, thus giving the world Coloring Book Wonka, a version of Wonka that only I have ever cared about. There's also a Search and Find book, the What is the Story of Willy Wonka book, a sort of personalized gift book, and others. I feel like the book universe doesn't get the amount of credit that it deserves. It effectively birthed the Wonka franchise and houses what is still one of the best Wonkas out there. Book Wonka not only has a solid design, but what little lore he has is interesting, and his character is the perfect blend of crazy and pleasant. Book Wonka is a Wonka that cares, which is far more important than what most people give it credit for. Book Wonka is the ruler of a dream world, a location that seems like a haven for children, which means that Book Wonka is supposed to be a pleasant and caring character. Book Wonka caring about his child patrons is also important for what the book sets out to teach. The book aims to teach kids that undesirable traits will be punished, and that having good traits will help you win in the end. However, when disciplining kids, there obviously needs to be a sense of care. You want to show the child that you're doing this out of love, and they're for own good. This is why Book Wonka cares. He is an authoritative figure, and that is what children will see him as. This is why we see him freaking out with the parents and being genuinely concerned over the children's safety. This sense of care is something that I feel the franchise needs more of, especially within, say, the past 10 years. And yes, I get that the book and Book Wonka is dark. You'll often hear about how screw up the book actually is, how Book Wonka is this cold, dark figure with potentially ulterior motives. However, when you read the book and really analyze the character, how much weight do these claims actually hold? In the book, he's excited, he's happy, he's outgoing when in the presence of the tormates, and he seems to be a genuinely nice man to be around. This happy-go-lucky caring persona is something that other Wonkas rarely ever adopt, and it's understandable for a lot of them. Gene Wilder was largely known as a comedy actor, and for his Wonka to be humorous, they had to cut back that sense of care. In this case, I think they did a good job. 1971 Wonka is a funny character who does have heart to him. Wonka does the whole "you lose" speech for a reason. He's angry because Charlie, who seemed to be this imaginative character who had a heart of gold, got roped into the wonders of the factory just like all the other kids. Thanks to Grandpa Joe, might I add. Until Charlie proves himself by giving back one of the gobstoppers, and then Wonka realizes that Charlie is in fact the one meant to be the heir to his throne. The openness in his voice and how happy he is shows that there is a bit of care deep down. And I get this contrast with how he acted before in the film, but he's a character you weren't supposed to really trust completely. With 1971 Wonka, they sorta took Book Wonka's prankster tendencies and really cranked them up. But only rarely do 1971 Wonka's antics feel like they're intended with actual malice. Speaking of him, by the way, one of the most defining aspects of this franchise is the movies. It's one of the only reasons this franchise ever really started to take off. And with classics like the 1971 and 2005 films, it's not much wonder as to why. Dare I say, without them, the Wonka franchise wouldn't be as popular, and it would be a vastly different and more barren place. The first Willy Wonka film is the 1971 film, which unsurprisingly is one of my most favorites. And this isn't just because I'm a Willy Wonka fan. It amazes me that they were able to do what they did back in the early 70s. With a ton of really neat tricks, they were able to make a film that, to this day, many would argue is the definitive Willy Wonka experience. Oh boy, I'm gonna have to talk about that one soon, aren't I? Certain additions to the character, certain changes to the story, the songs they added, like Candyman and Pure Imagination, they have always stuck with this franchise, and for good reason. This film is great. As an adaptation, it does a great job of not only bringing the book to the big screen, but I also loved how the directors added their revisions onto it. I love the changes to Wonka's appearance. It's different, but still feels like Wonka. I like how they made Augustus German so that he stands out more as a character. I enjoyed a lot of the additional song numbers. I also enjoy how intuitive this film is. They used a ton of really cool yet surprisingly simple tricks to make things feel as real as possible. For example, the kids' reaction to the chocolate room was genuine, as the actors were given specific instructions to not bear witness to it until that specific scene in the movie. The reactions to 1971 Wonka's insane boat ranting was also genuine. They didn't tell the Captain Oompa Loompa that the boat was a prop pulled by pulleys, so it adds on that extra sense of realism, like he's really stirring that boat. Speaking of the Oompa Loompas, they actually hired 10 dwarfism actors in order to play the Oompa Loompas. No cloning, no special effects, nothing. And then there's the Chocolate River, which was only partially chocolate. They had to add things like shampoo chemicals of all things in order to get the consistency just right. And yes, they put chemicals in there, but this was the 70s, they had to get through with what they had, and for what it's worth, they did a good job portraying the river along with everything else. Dare I say, this movie has aged beautifully. These sets still look really whimsical, even so many years later. And the nostalgic feeling not only gives it this oddly comforting aura, dare I say certain parts of this film would fit under liminal spaces? Man, I don't know. It sort of gives off the same vibes, nostalgic yet off-putting. And now we get to the next major film in the timeline, the 2005 film. And oh boy, did I do this film a disservice. You know what? No, disservice isn't the right word. For this retrospective, I had to basically force myself to watch it. It was one of the most soul-crushing experiences I have ever had watching a YouTube video. Never mind the fact that it's a bad review by itself. What really stings is that I made it to celebrate my channel's 5-year anniversary. Imagine celebrating something that huge, with a project that you've worked months and months and months on. Only for that project to turn out to be absolute garbage and the single worst thing to come out of your entire YouTube channel. I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty soul-crushing. Despite this video, I would make a thank you video to end off the year. I do plan on redoing my 2005 Wonka review someday, a video that will go far more in depth as to what I think of the film now, and the many problems of my old review. So to summarize here, for what it is, it's a good movie. Yeah, it's weird to hear that come out of my mouth, but I've come to realize, yeah, it's got a lot going for it. As a Tim Burton version of Willy Wonka, it does its job well. And I can also really appreciate the lessons they wanted to teach. I used to hate 2005 Wonka as a character, but now, the hate has entirely evaporated. To be fair, there are still, maybe one or two aspects of the character I don't like the few instances where they went overboard with him being mean. But overall, dare I say, he's able to fit with 1971 Wonka and 2023 Wonka. His attitude is, nowhere near as bad as I made it out to be. I mean, sure, he has some moments where it gets out of line, but in all fairness, they're only small bits, and they don't feel anywhere near as bad as, say, Broadway Wonka. Next up is the Tom and Jerry film. Listen, I don't know why this film exists. This film is an enigma. Does this film need to exist? I don't know, but hey, we have it, and at least it's something to poke fun at. Tom and Jerry crossing over with Willy Wonka. Yay. To be honest, I think this film is mid. Painfully mid. It has bad qualities and good qualities that equal out to being just mediocre. First, the positives. I really love the way the backgrounds are drawn. They look gorgeous, especially with things like lighting and textures. They really make the settings interesting, and the 2D style of animation allows for the interior rooms of the factory to be far more detailed, and there's a lot more to look at than the original film. I also like how they brought back the rock candy mines from Charlie in the Great Glass Elevator. But then the negatives. To summarize, the songs are inferior to the originals because the sound mixing is all over the place, and shoehorning Tom and Jerry into the plot. Listen, I am not hostile towards the idea, but it's one of the things that just makes you scratch your head. It would have taken some serious revisions to fit these two into the Willy Wonka story. And then we get to another serious problem. Compared to the 1971 Wonka, they barely changed anything. Same location, same characters, same candies, the same Wonka, same everything. I do like how they kept 1971 Wonka's funny, rule-abiding self, but literally the only difference between 1971 Wonka and Tom and Jerry Wonka is the fact that the latter has 2005 Wonka's hair for some odd reason. Wonka with Timothée Chalamet. I watched it in theaters and I liked it. With this film, it's an original story about Wonka struggling to make a name for himself and finding his footing in a world that is constantly pushing against him. What did I like about this film? I like this version of Wonka, genuinely. I like the more faded aesthetic. I love how he puts his weird demigod demon side into full display, and I love how his character is portrayed. He's a younger version of the peppy, wild, and adventure-loving book Wonka, and I personally think this works as an origin story because it falls in line with what the character is. It has tension, heartfelt moments, just about everything. And overall, 2023 Wonka feels like he could fit in with the other Wonkas from the franchise's golden years. Other than that, I think the movie has a stellar presentation, a lot of the songs were pretty good, I like the ideas they had for many of the candies. Overall, the movie is really decent, and if you ask me, a great take at an origin story for the character. I was pleasantly surprised, and I am happy to welcome Chalamet's Wonka into the list of Wonkas. But this franchise isn't just about movies and books, there are a ton of other pieces of Wonka media, which conveniently segues into... I feel like this franchise can be truly enjoyed once you're able to look at it through a broad lens, and look at the many other things it has to offer. One of which being the fact that Wonka has his own Pop Tropica island. No, really, this actually existed. Another example is the ServiceNow commercials. In 2021, ServiceNow made these awesome commercials advertising their digital workflows. ServiceNow Wonka is fantastic, actually. I adore a lot of the extra stuff they did with him in his factory, like him making edible vinyl discs, a portion of his factory exploding and making it snow coconut shavings. But my most favorite thing is his office. Oh my gosh, I love his office so much. It just feels like Willy Wonka. The slide that goes down, the mix of seriousness and fun, it all mixes perfectly. And even his personality and attitude fit in line perfectly. This man actually cares. He cares about his child patrons. He is seen worrying about the children not having a supply of Wonka bars. He is seen worrying about his business. He's playful, he's inciting, he's caring. He even has a little bit of that awkward edge that 2005 Wonka had. But enough about this guy, let's get to the first ever Willy Wonka video game, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory for the ZX Spectrum. The ZX Spectrum was a personal microcomputer developed by Sinclair Research in 1982, and one of its many games was the first ever Willy Wonka video game. It sucks and blows. There is also Tony's. Tony's is this little block thing that you put these figurines on, and the figurines will tell you a story. There is one for Book Wonka. However, there is one branch of the Wonka universe that I want to focus on. What is my personal most favorite area of the Wonkaverse, housing what are some of the absolute best versions of the character to have ever spawned. Ladies and gentlemen, I present... If you've seen my content at all, you know that I am a huge fan of the long-forgotten Wonka Candy Company. I've been vaguely aware of the company's existence, however, I've never really dug deep until working on my iceberg video. And believe me when I say that you can dig deep. Heck, I've known about this company for 3 years, and to this day I'm finding new pieces of information. Like this old Wonka size Shockwave game that used to be on the Wonka.com website. And this single screenshot from a lost Wonka UK commercial that I came across earlier this year in 2024. However, I want to tell you about the company itself, a brief history overview, and how we ended up getting where we are today. Initially starting ownership with the Quaker Oats Company to advertise the 1971 film, the Wonka Company was then known as the Breaker Confections Company. As such, the first major era of this company is named the Breaker Era, with their mascot being Breaker Wonka. Honestly, this mascot is kind of a nothing burger. I like the simple design as well as how many variations it has, but at the same time, there's not much to talk about. I mean, they had sweepstakes, like one where you could win a US tour, and they had this reading Make Summer Sweeter campaign. During this time, a lot of Wonka products were born, like the Scrumdiddlyumptious bar and the Super Scrunch bar. And they even adopted Nerds during this time, something that would become a franchise classic. Sometime in the mid-80s, Nestle would be given ownership of the brand, which grew axed in 2015 because they wanted to follow on the false promise of pursuing more healthy products. Anyway, in the early 90s, they moved on to a new era, the Sunmark era, named so due to the Sunmark Corporation's involvement with the Wonka brand. Sunmark Wonka is cool, I guess. He's just a mix of 1971 Wonka and the next Wonka we'll be talking about. By the way, what makes these two eras so interesting isn't just because of the mascots, but because of the real-life Willy Wonka, Mark Sweet. Mark Sweet is a magician and comedian who, in 1972, was hired on behalf of a friend to be the real-life Willy Wonka spokesperson. And his version of Wonka is good. No, not good. Amazing. I'll admit, I feel like I've never given this guy enough credit. His Wonka is awesome. Seeing him in real life versus both Sunmark and Breaker Wonka gives him an edge, and he has an actual personality. He's outgoing, he's playful, he's loving and caring, and I love the addition of stage magic. It genuinely feels like something that the logic-defying Willy Wonka would really be into. He also has a peanut butter machine. When's the last time you heard Willy Wonka experiment with peanut butter? That's right, never. Unfortunately, Mark Sweet's Wonka mascot isn't considered the Wonka mascot. If you want the Wonka mascot and the definitive Nestle Wonka experience, look no further than the classic era, starting in the mid-90s.
Hurry now, we have so much time and so little to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, the best Wonka to ever exist, classic Nestle Wonka. I cannot overstate how much I adore this version of Wonka. He is the perfect version of the character. Everything from his design to his lore to his personality and quirks, it all fits. He's funny, he's engaging, he's mystical, he's unpredictable, he's adventurous. He even has the uncanny fear factor that is the defining trait of who Wonka is. First, let's look at his design. Everything about this design rocks. I love the mix of 1971 Wonka and Book Wonka. He has Book Wonka's green trousers while also having 1971 Wonka's use of purple, crazy hair, and pronounced nose. It feels like they took the best of both worlds. Literally the only complaint I could possibly see is that the early 2000s eye strain colors are a bit too harsh. That, and it makes him feel like a little too much of a product of his time. But if we're being real, this is Willy Wonka, a character known for being all bright and crazy. Second, his personality. This Wonka should serve as a shining example of how the character should act. Being mindful, excited at every opportunity, caring about those around him, while also not being afraid to be reckless, throwing caution to the wind and not being afraid of anything that comes his way. This is the kind of Wonka that kids should be looking up to. A fearless ruler who cares about those under his wing. And then we get to the lore. I legit don't know where to start because there is so much. 3 years later, I am still finding things that are over 20 years old and have not been seen by human eyes since the early 2000s. The most recent example is this old Wonka Says game. Speaking of which, the Flash games. If you remember or know the Wonka brand at all, you remember the Flash games. They are considered highly nostalgic by those who are privileged and lucky enough to have Wonka bless their childhoods. And to show just how much Nestle Wonka cares, he actually bothered to get up and out of his factory to tour the US. Nestle had Wonka Mobile tours starting in the late 90s and up until the late 2000s. A guy in a Wonka mascot costume would go out and about driving the Wonka Mobile, and they'd hand out fun games and candy wherever they stopped. The first version of the Wonka Mobile was this long RV that had a few rooms inside of it. Later models of the Wonka Mobile featured a large purple van with all kinds of Wonka branding on it. And yes, this means they had Willy Wonka mascot costumes. There are multiple models of the costume out there, but the two I want to focus on are this early one used during the late 90s and this one used during the 2000s. With the first one, I feel like they wanted to lean more into the cartoony proportion of the mascot, and while I can applaud their efforts, the costume itself looks horrifying. And I think they realized this because the next costume went for a much more human appearance, and they nailed this design. They found the perfect balance of cartoon with real, which also follows along with the balance of cuteness and horror that I feel like Wonka excels at. There were also things that had to do with the brand itself, like various sweepstakes. There was one where you could win a backyard pool or a waterproof boombox, another one where you could win to be starred in one of those prank TV shows, and another where you could win a roller coaster trip for a family tour. Speaking of the last one, it was called the Sweepstakes, and during that year's Wonka Mobile tour, Wonka gathered a bunch of kids to try and break the world record for the loudest scream ever. Sadly, they didn't make the cut. There is also merchandise. If you want a more in-depth look at Wonka merchandise from the classic era, I have a video talking about Willy Wonka merch in general, but a few highlights of this are Wonka gumball machine toys, these small tins, this amazing looking store display. It's surreal and almost unsettling a way, looking at these artifacts from a bygone era. Later, the 2005 film released. Since this was a huge moment for Wonka, naturally they changed the Wonka brand into the burnout era. Why am I still calling it this? During this time they released Wonka Donuts, along with a Wonka Donuts flash game and a flash game promoting a real-life golden ticket contest that was being held worldwide at the time. It was the company's most short-lived era, as a year later in 2006, Wonka would enter the modern era, with a more up-to-date mascot. This time Wonka was more rounded with colors that were easier on the eyes. The company continued the tradition of sweepstakes, including the Wannabe Wonka event where kids could submit their own Wonka candy idea for a chance of it becoming a real Wonka product. There was also the Lost for Lyrics sweepstakes, where someone had chance for their giant chewy nerd song to become a viral hit. However, despite all of this praise, I do have one glaring issue with this era. It trying to be hip with the kids. And oh my word, is it dumb. One of the sweepstakes they had was related to how you could have your own virtual room on the Wonka website during the modern era, and you could have a chance to have your own real-life room decked out and Wonkanized. But the videos they released for it are just awful. The songs they make, which include a Simon and Garfunkel parody for some reason, try way too hard to be hip with the kids. As for this era's mascot, they took Nestle Wonka and rounded out the edges and gave him a darker color palette. I appreciate how they tried to upgrade Nestle Wonka, going from a sharper, more saturated character to something more soft and rounded and features colors that were more soft and desaturated. It does feel like a good upgrade to something that was appropriate at the time, but the whole pandering aspect was still there, and it would only get worse during the company's next era. The postmodern era starts sometime around the turn of 2009, and whether or not it's an upgrade or downgrade is really up in the air. By itself, the new coat of paint looks fantastic. I really like the purple and blue gradients combined with the other brighter colored ribbons for a contrast. It actually matches up with some key art for the 1971 film. Right off the bat, the most alarming thing about Wonka's postmodern era is the lack of a mascot. They straight up never had a mascot during the postmodern era, which is a double-edged sword. On one hand, one of Wonka's most defining aspects is the mascot history. If there are at least a few things people remember this brand for, it's the flash games and mascots. So when you decide not to have a mascot during the postmodern era, the amount of people remembering and enjoying your brand is going to be limited. At the same time, it's such a bold move that I can't help but respect it almost. And it makes sense from a lore standpoint. Wonka is a very mysterious character, one who almost never shows his face, so it makes sense for a company of his to be structured this way. And it makes this era of Wonka unique. One of the most unique things you can do for an era of the Wonka brand is to not have a mascot, even if it sounds counterintuitive. This era of Wonka has some really cool pieces of lore actually, like the fact that they had no less than an entire Toys R Us shop. They had a shop in the Toys R Us Times Square location, and it looks absolutely amazing. Dare I say this rivals the stuff we saw in the classic era. They also held rock band tours, at least 2 of them, both of which covered in their own Blogspot blog. But that whole rock band tour things bring me to the downfall of the Wonka brand. The brand was renamed to the Nestle Candy Shop before being axed completely in 2018 due to Ferrero buying out all the original Wonka candies. However, what I felt helped that downfall was trying to appeal to their fans too much. What they had effectively tried to do was grow up with their consumers. The classic era was the baby phase, the modern era was the preteen phase, and the postmodern era is the hip and cool mid to late teens phase, where everything is about partying and rock and roll. But in doing this, they're limiting their audience, and because of this, they then tried to appeal to nostalgia-ridden adults, which ended up backfiring spectacularly. However, the Wonka brand would come back for one last hurrah. For the release of the 2023 film, Ferrero brought back the Wonka brand. And it was a strange time to be alive. They even held a sweepstake event, just like old times. It wasn't anything compared to any of the previous eras in terms of scale. but I think it makes up for that just by simply existing. And now that Ferrero owns the Wonka brand, that means that it's now in trustworthy hands. However, there is one last thing about the Wonka brand that I want to discuss. A branch that has been almost entirely lost to time. A puzzle with seemingly no solution. This is Wonka UK. Wonka UK has been a thing ever since Nestle took hold of the brand. But its classic era is where it started to get its true identity. Starting in mid-1999, Wonka UK would go from being a simple palette swap to this.
Want to see my latest invention? Exploding with chocolate. Bite into the Wonka chocolate.
Wonka UK is completely different from Wonka in the US. Instead of offbeat eye-strain colors and sharp wacky edges, we have more cold colors and uneasy 3D models. Everything feels mechanical in a way, especially UK Wonka. I absolutely adore this design. In concept, all they did was turn 2D Wonka into 3D Wonka, but because of the primitive technology at the time, he ended up looking like a robot, but that's why I love him so much. Part of why is because of how unique he feels. No other version of Wonka focuses on blues and similar colors for aesthetics. Nor does any other version of Wonka feature so much machinery. Sure, there's 2005 Wonka, but I feel like Nestle UK Wonka's added layer of colors, as well as him being more on the cartoon side, separates him in that aspect. And come on, what other official version of Wonka that you know of is a robot? I get that he isn't a robot officially, but everything about him says robot. From his appearance to his mannerisms to even his voice, which, fun fact, was provided by Jimmy Hibbert. I also love Nestle UK Wonka's attitude and vibes. He has this chaotic, overexcited vibe about him which I just love. It fits with how off everything else feels. The two kids, Charlie and his weird friend who was never named for some reason, are also seen getting into perilous situations in the commercials, while Wonka just sort of commentates over it. Now granted, this could fall under the whole Wonka hitting on children even though he's not supposed to thing, but meh, I'll let it slide here because these are crazy kids candy adverts. They want to make it all over the top and energetic to get kids to buy their merchandise. Other than Nestle being Nestle, I don't see any sort of malice here. But now we get to the lore and it's kind of a mess, but if you have everything organized like I have, it shouldn't be too difficult to follow along. If you want to know more in depth about Wonka UK, I would recommend watching my 2 older videos on the subject, but the main key points are the website, its exclusive flash games, and the exclusive candies. As for the website specifically, wonka.co.uk, it featured the cold blues and purples that the brand is known for. It also had exclusive flash games, all of which are lost to time thanks to them being a specific fork of Shockwave games that ran off of external data files. They also had exclusive candies like Wonka Wags and Lenny M. Bug. Now I want to remind you, this is a criminally oversimplified summary of what Wonka UK has to offer. Again, check out my other 2 videos for details. I will eventually be making a newer video discussing every single find that I've come across, with a lot less bias that covers everything both lost and found. And that was pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in regards to the Wonka brand, but we aren't done yet. Wonka, well, definitely a favorite part of this franchise for me. I wouldn't consider it my bread and butter. This next topic, however, is. Our trek into Willy Wonka isn't over. I've been saving something special for this last highlight. Everyone says that there are 4 Willy Wonka movies, those being the 4 I rambled about. However, this claim is a complete lie. There are 5 Wonka films, with the 5th or 2nd one, whichever, almost having been lost to the ether for what could have been years and years. This film is Kalle och Chokladfabriken. It's a film that I don't think any of my newer viewers have really ever heard about, unless you're someone who watches Teleanimated. He talked about Swedish Wonka, how he was lost media, and he even cited my research. He talked about a lot of Wonkas. Wonkas that all have at least some kind of fan representation somewhere out there on the internet. Swedish Wonka, however, is my bread and butter. Before I would go on to make multiple videos talking about Swedish Wonka, there was very little information about him or his movie online anywhere. There was some footage on YouTube and 1 or 2 English internet pages talking about the film, but that was the largest extent that the English-speaking internet has ever been able to get. But then I stepped in. I made my original video talking about the subject, and throughout the months and years, Swedish Wonka would soon turn into a hot commodity of sorts within the Willy Wonka and lost media scenes. People actually started to talk about it again. Multiple Reddit posts from different circles, people coming together, people actually contacting the original production company behind the film. It was really something magical to see, especially for me. I was the guy who started this whole thing, and seeing Swedish Wonka actually become a topic of discussion thanks in part to my research tugs at my heartstrings in a way. But enough about me. What exactly makes this film such a point of discussion? The cartoon itself was made in 1983 by SVT, featuring illustrations by Bengt Arne Rennerstrom and narration by the late but legendary Ernst Hugo Jodgaard. The film consists of watercolor stills, panned and zoomed in tandem with Jagger's narration. Speaking of the former, one of the best parts about this film without a doubt has to be the illustrations used. These are genuinely magical and beautiful looking pieces of artwork. They're so strange, in a good way. They feel like something not of this world, especially with how characters express themselves. All of these characters, Swedish Wonka especially, make some of the best faces I've ever seen out of any cartoon. Look at these, and try and tell me that Swedish Wonka isn't amazing. Everything about this film is unique. The art style, the actors, the designs, it feels like nothing we've ever seen from this franchise. Which makes it a shame that this film used to be lost for a long while. In fact, before I ever stepped in, only a very small pool of people ever talked about it. There was like one Reddit post and one post on the Lost Media wiki forums, but ever since I started talking about it, more and more people started talking about it too. And it being Lost Media started to gain more and more traction, until Teleanimated's video let the right person know. Eventually, the film was found on September 22nd, 2024, by that guy with no name. Huh, crazy to think it was only 2 days after my birthday. I've watched it, and it's pretty great. The film has an almost sleepy vibe to it. The pacing is slow, the rest of the illustrations are dreamlike, the transitions are mostly fades. It's something that children's television is seriously lacking nowadays. Something that I haven't talked about until recently is my involvement in an email group with a few people who have close relations to the Swedish cartoon, one of which including Bengt Arne Runestrom himself. We've talked and I've gotten to know a lot of the fascinating insight about this involvement with the cartoon's production. Like he was tasked with making over 300 illustrations in just a year's time, how he hadn't experienced Willy Wonka at all prior to the production, and how he based Swedish Wonka largely off of Jodgod's narration. It's this kind of intuition and dedication that gives Runestrom my utmost respect, and I am very thankful to have met not just him but everyone else in the team. Speaking of which, they recently released a documentary where Runestrom provides commentary, shows off some stills in their raw canvas form, and even draws Swedish Wonka for what is likely the first time in over 40 years. After you're done watching this retrospective, please go watch the documentary. It's a fascinating insight on what used to be a lost chapter in the Wonka history books. Willy Wonka is a franchise that has been around a lot longer than most would realize. Throughout the years, it has changed and evolved, and in a way it has grown up a lot like you and I. It has had ups and downs, identity crises, unexpected revelations, and a lot of other things that people experience while growing up. And much like people, it again has good moments and bad moments, golden years and years that felt like only darkness lie ahead. If I had to point what would be the franchise's golden years, it would be starting in the 70s, and ending sometime either in the 2000s or 2010s. During the 70s to 90s, Willy Wonka was thriving, not just off of the books, but also movie sales and candy merchandise. You saw Wonka everywhere, and Wonka himself felt real thanks to the endeavors of Nestle. Wonka was giving joy and love to the children of the world, just like how he was always written to do. And in 2005, the franchise continued to thrive, with the release of the 2005 film. Renewed interest in the franchise and a real-life golden ticket contest allowed children to live their Wonka-painted dreams. Even in the 2010s, the franchise was still doing good, with the release of an opera and a real-life Wonka store opening up in Toys R Us. And I'm happy to say that right now, Willy Wonka is doing pretty good. The 2023 film is quite the breath of fresh air, especially for it being one of the major Wonka films. And thanks to it, the Wonka Candy Company actually came back, which is something that I never would have expected in 1,000 years. And under the new guidance of Ferrero, along with digital preservation being of actual concern now, I can be confident in knowing that this new era of the company is prosperous and will be remembered and preserved. I was originally going to make a video on the company returning, and considering this was right after my 2005 Wonka video, it was me ranting and raving and being a negative Nancy, complaining about how the company had not changed at all since it left off during the postmodern era, instead of being grateful that the company was even back to begin with. I doubt that video will ever see the light of day, largely because I don't want another disastrous 2005 reboot happening. Other things like the search and find books, other nice forms of merchandise, and the Swedish cartoon being found all point towards the 2020s being an ironically good decade for Wonka. And they're even producing a new reality TV series that I plan on watching when it comes out. Willy Wonka is an important franchise to me. It's allowed me to finally put myself and my work out there. It's allowed me to find a footing concerning what I want to do in life. Studying Willy Wonka designs has led me to fall in love with graphic design. And it has allowed me to talk with some of the coolest people I've ever had the privilege of meeting. It's all been one giant roller coaster, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. Here's to hoping that 2025 is a great year for the Wonka franchise. Peace on everyone, hope you have a wonderful day.